Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we are so glad to have you here. Today we are diving into the fast lane with a topic that affects every driver in the state. That is speed limits. Standing by is State Senator Declan O'Scanlon to discuss his proposed legislation that could change how speed limits are set on New Jersey's highways. First, though, a look inside the Electoral College right here in New Jersey. Joining me now to explain a little bit more about how the Electoral College process works in our state is Parimal Garg, who served as an elector and until recently was Governor Murphy's chief counsel. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. It's great to see you.
Yeah, well, let's start a little bit about explaining the basic role and function of the Electoral College in the United States presidential election process. Like, we hear about it, that's what we're paying attention to, but when it gets down to it, it's a difficult thing for a lot of people to explain, but not so much for you.
Yeah, so the Electoral College is one of the quirks of our electoral system that I think people in a lot of countries might not fully understand, but it's been a process that's been part of America's democracy since the Constitution. And what it means is that the president is technically elected by a group of 538 people who constitute the Electoral College. Every state has a number of electoral votes that's equivalent to the number of members of the House of Representatives, plus their 2 U.S. senators, which is 435 members of the House, 100 U.S. senators, and then the District of Columbia, even though it doesn't have voting members of Congress, is given 3 electoral votes, because if it were a state, it would have 2 senators and 1 member of the House. So that's how you get to 538 votes. And historically, I think if you look at some of the debates among the founders, some of them believe that the Electoral College would sort of exercise independent judgment as to who the president should be. But very quickly, it became clear that the role of the Electoral College was to represent the views of their states as expressed by the people who voted within those states. So at this point, every now and then you hear about so-called faithless electors, people who, even if their state voted for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, might cast a vote for someone else. But that is the extreme exception. A number of states actually even have laws preventing that, even though those haven't really been challenged in court. But thankfully, on the vast majority of occasions, electors are just there to vote for the presidential and vice presidential candidate who their state had voted for in the election.
And I think that is something people don't always think about when they are going. I know this isn't something they think about. I don't think about it. When I'm casting my ballot, you think, oh, I'm voting for president. But you're not. You're actually voting for a group of people who will then get together. And we had, I believe, 9 different presidential nominations, 9 different options in New Jersey for president. But, obviously most knew Kamala Harris, Donald Trump. And you're actually voting for that group. And in New Jersey, it's 14. That group of electors to then meet to then cast their vote. But people don't always realize it. That's another quirk of voting for president and vice president.
Yeah, so anyone who showed up on November 5th to vote for the Harris-Walz ticket or the Trump-Vance ticket, like you said, Laura, they were actually voting for a slate of 14 electors that the Harris campaign or the Trump campaign, in conjunction with our state parties, selected. And then those electors, on December 17th, they actually met and cast their votes, in this case, for Vice President Harris and for Governor Walz.
Right. And then from there, it goes to Congress. And on January 6th, it is then cemented in. So can you talk a little bit in New Jersey specifically? Because, again, you think you're voting for president, a vice president, but you're voting for these electors. So how are they chosen? And are there certain qualifications these electors must have?
Yeah, that's a great question. By and large, there really aren't specific qualifications. Obviously, you have to be a citizen and someone who's eligible to vote for president. But beyond that, they really can be individuals who are selected by the campaign in conjunction with the state party. So the Harris campaign and the New Jersey Democratic Party, they worked together and put together a slate of 14 electors. I was very honored to be one of the 14, but I was joined by a number of other leaders within the party. For example, Thais Davis, who's the chairwoman of the Monmouth County Democratic Party, John Curry, who's the chairman of the Passaic County Democratic Party, Ellen Park, who's an assemblywoman in Bergen County, Mildred Scott, who's the sheriff in Middlesex County, Siley Avalenda, who's the executive director of the state party for many years. That's just a handful of people who were part of the Electoral College delegation alongside myself.
Can you tell us or share a little bit about your personal experience of being an elector in New Jersey? You were just there at the end of the year casting your vote. What it's like of being an elector?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of conflicting emotions because on the one hand, it seems like it's this great, privilege and responsibility that you're one of 538 people who are technically electing the president and vice president. But then on the other hand, you really are just exercising the will of the people. So in that respect, the duty that you're performing, even though it's a very important and solemn duty, it really is almost ministerial because you're not there to exercise your independent judgment. You're there to represent the views of the people of New Jersey who on November 5th, they voted for Kamala Harris and for Tim Walz for president and vice president. So, the 14 of us, again, even though our votes are technically the only ones that mattered for the Electoral College, we were really just carrying out the will of the people. And I think that's a big difference between this year and 4 years ago, where, 4 years ago, even though the election was actually not as close as it was this time, obviously there was a lot of controversy around the certification of the election and, whether the vice president would accept the results, and a lot of members of Congress objected to that. None of that happened this time. And thankfully, I think it's because people realized, even the side that had lost the election, that it's important to respect the will of the people and that the will of the people is the only thing that matters. And there's really no role for people, whether it's the electors in the Electoral College, whether it's for members of Congress, whether it's the vice president who presides over the certification process. There's no role for them to disturb the will of the people in a democracy.
And see, that's what's so fascinating to me. There's nothing to stop you as an elector if you wanted to cast your vote for somebody else, for whoever you can, but it's very rare that someone goes rogue like that. But there's nothing written in the law that says you have to vote for the person you said you're going to. That to me, it's and you as your background as an attorney, that feels like a big loophole in the law.
Yeah, it absolutely is a loophole. And there are states that have laws against faithless electors, but those laws have by and large never been challenged. So it's not clear what would happen, if there was a very close election and faithless electors sort of tip the balance of it, and then there were to be a challenge in court. It's not clear what would happen. And there are a lot of scenarios where that could actually be the case. For example, in this past election, if Vice President Harris had carried all of the states that she did carry, plus Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all of which she lost by less than 2 percentage points, she would have won the Electoral College by a vote of 270 to 268, which means that any one of her 270 electors, if they had decided to vote for someone else, she would not have had a majority in the Electoral College, and the election would have gone to the House of Representatives. And like I said, even if that person was from a state that had a law against a faithless elector, that would mean that you would have a challenge in court that could potentially decide the presidency of the United States. Now, again, that would be entirely inappropriate for one person to substitute their views for the will of the people in their state. But that does really illustrate that there are scenarios that aren't that far fetched where, again, one or a handful of people, if they act in a way that is not carrying out their responsibilities, they could really cause chaos in terms of who the next president and vice president would be.
And there are a lot of people who say it's time to let the Electoral College go, that it should be popular vote. I'm not going to put you in that spot to say whether it should go or not. But can you talk just a little bit about, walking us through that day of the Electoral College when you're casting that vote? It really is it's more pomp and circumstance. There isn't a lot of substance to that day. But can you just talk a little bit about what it was like going through that day in New Jersey?
Yeah, so it felt very much like conflicting emotions because it felt like this great responsibility, and obviously the people who were part of the Electoral College delegation, we took it very seriously, and we wanted to exercise our judgment and our responsibility. But again, there really wasn't, a judgment for us to exercise because the people of New Jersey had already come together on November 5th, and they had cast their votes for Vice President Harris and for Governor Walz, and we were just carrying out the will of the people.
And just final thoughts here. As an elector, is this something that people come back, they do each, is it, they come back and they're electors again, or is it kind of a one and done thing, again, more ceremonial as it's picked by people inside the campaigns?
So it's a good question. There's nothing prohibiting people from being electors in multiple cycles. I think those of us who have been electors sort of recognize that it's a unique opportunity. And at least from my perspective, 4 years from now, I would want to let someone else have that opportunity. So again, the same people could be the electors election cycle after election cycle. But again, given that this is largely a ceremonial responsibility, it's something that, it's a great honor to do once, but not sure there's a ton of value in doing it over and over.
Well, and you've just left, you were chief counsel to Governor Murphy, now transitioning into private practice. Just thoughts on that, and as you're starting a new chapter, would you like to share anything about your time with Governor Murphy?
Yeah, so as you can tell from my office, just recently moved in, but it was a great honor to have worked for Governor Murphy since the start of his first campaign and through 7 years in the governor's office, including 4 years as his chief counsel. And, Governor Murphy, I think, has left an incredible legacy for the state, his leadership through the pandemic, his leadership in restoring New Jersey's fiscal standing and receiving 7 credit rating upgrades, restoring New Jersey as a leader on a number of issues, from abortion rights to gun safety to environmental protection to access to affordable health care. So it was a great honor to be, a part of Governor Murphy's team for so long. And I'm looking forward to hopefully utilizing some of the experience that I had in his administration and in state government at Lowenstein Sandler, my new firm, and hopefully using that knowledge and experience for the benefit of our clients.
Well, we appreciate you sharing those thoughts, and also for the explanation more in depth about the Electoral College. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Laura.
Absolutely. One state lawmaker wants to change how speed limits are set on New Jersey roads. Joining me now is State Senator Declan O'Scanlon. Senator, good to see you. Welcome.
Nice to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very interested in this topic. You've introduced a bill that would change how we set speed limits in New Jersey. So first, how are they set, and what would your bill change?
Right now, they're set arbitrarily by bureaucrats and state legislators, neither of whom know what they're doing. This bill would take the setting of speed limits out of the hands of people that are not qualified, like me, and put it into traffic engineers. There is a science to setting speed limits, and this is for limited access highways, Parkway, Turnpike, 195, not on secondary roads. We could talk about that at a later date, but because we could do that better too. But this would, on those roads, put the setting of speed limits in the hands of traffic safety engineers. And there is science behind it. And it directs them to use proper traffic safety engineering to set speed limits. And that methodology is pretty simple. You go out and you measure the speeds that people are actually driving, and you set the speed limit at the rates that 85% of people are traveling at or below. So out of 100 cars, if 85 of them are traveling below 70 or below 75, you would set the speed limit at 70 or 75. And if you do that, you get the safest, smoothest flow of traffic. You don't actually, if you happen to increase the speed limit because of that methodology, you don't see appreciable increase in the speeds people drive. It's a myth that everybody drives 10 miles an hour faster than the speed limit. It just it that does not happen. By that reasoning, if we set the speed limit at 120, everyone would drive 130. No, they wouldn't. And we see average and 85th percentile speeds are very similar here in New Jersey to what they are in other states where they're posted at 75 miles an hour. Stretches of the Autobahn with no speed limit, it's very similar as well, the speeds. So we're not looking to change the speeds at which people are driving. We're looking to have more consistent and again, safer, more smooth traffic flow. There are some people who slavishly try to adhere to this artificially low speed limit, or very likely what is an artificially low speed limit of 65 on most of these roadways. And it may be appropriate in some stretches, that's fine. And those people who were slavishly trying to adhere to the speed limit would very likely move up a few miles an hour and thus enhancing safety, reducing passing, and making for smoother, safer traffic flow, which, by the way, is the same thing we saw back in the mid 90s. I was here, which makes me older than I think I should be, when we got rid of the ridiculous 55 mile an hour speed limit. The naysayers predicted everyone's going to drive 10 miles an hour faster. It's going to be carnage on our roadways. Neither of those things happened. After we raised the speed limit, speeds only went up by 1 or 2 miles an hour. And we had decades of safety improvements after that. So you can have higher speed limits and an increase in safety. It may be counterintuitive, but it's exactly what happens.
And there's actual science behind this 85th percentile rule, and that's what you're looking at. And it's interesting you bring up the Autobahn, when you talk about, people won't go 130 miles an hour, and that's why somebody might bring up as well on the Autobahn there isn't. So you're saying the science behind it is showing there's a certain comfort zone and to actually trust the drivers on this. Literally put the drivers in the driver's seat.
That is exactly right. And again, you will have to say there's a reason to do this. Some people say, why don't you just leave it because everybody drives what they're going to drive anyway. There is science behind this. There's safety reasons for this. It is the way we should do this. There's no question in my mind. And again, you need look no further than the experience that we've had right here in New Jersey. So it's a smart move, and I'm hopeful that the legislature will get on board and the governor will join me.
Well, there's science behind it. Is there finance behind it too? In certain areas where there are speed traps, where certain townships, municipalities, where they depend on people going over the speed limit in order to get them and fine them?
Well, if that's the case, then we absolutely should do this, because that is then government sanctioned theft of underposting speed limits and purposely entrap people. When you post a speed limit, which they do in places, Washington, D.C., where they have automated speed enforcement, one of the most horrific things out there. They have multi-lane highways posted at 35 and 45 miles an hour. They literally give a ticket to everybody that goes by. If governments are doing that, or the state of New Jersey is doing that, they need to stop. We can't have government entrapping us into breaking an unreasonable law and then fine us for it. That's not how government's supposed to work. That's disgusting, actually.
What about a minimum speed limit? If you're cruising along the Parkway, Turnpike, and you've got that person in the left-hand lane going 45 miles an hour, and it's a hazard. Like, would your legislation address that minimum speed limits?
It wouldn't. I believe we do have a minimum. I got to check that, actually. I think 45 is the minimum that exists statutorily now. I could be wrong about that. People shouldn't be on these highways driving 45 miles an hour because it's hazardous. But you hit on another point, is lane discipline. One of the worst and most dangerous practices is people failing to keep to the right unless they're passing. It doesn't matter if you're traveling the speed limit. The law says you need to keep to the right unless you're passing. And hopefully your listeners are hearing this. And if a few people realize that and get out of the left lane, that we're doing a big safety improvement here. But that is a problem. And it is something that this would enable police to focus less on trying to push people into an artificially low speed limit. They could focus on things like lane discipline. We have statutes for that. There are pretty hefty fines for failure to keep right. The police ought to be pulling people over, educating them. I'm not necessarily encouraging them to fine and ticket these folks, but they should be educating them.
Well, and it can be a safety hazard if you're going along and somebody in that left lane is going below the speed limit. And when you're on a road
Or
like
even
go ahead. Mm-hmm.
even if they're above the speed limit, if there's overtaking traffic, I don't care whether you're driving 80. If there's someone behind you, get the hell out of the left lane, because again, the statute doesn't say if you're traveling the speed limit, you're fine to be in any lane. The statute says you are to keep to the right except to pass. So whatever speed you're traveling, stay out of the left lane unless you're passing. And if someone is behind you, move over so they can pass. If you're in the left lane, and people who park in the left lane or travel in the left lane causes a lot more lane changes. Lane changes are hazardous. You've got blind spots, etc. It's a really, really bad habit to be in, and people should break that. Stay the hell out of the left lane, drive reasonably, we'll post reasonable speed limits, and the roads will be much, much safer.
Yeah, I mean, the Garden State Parkway in particular, it seems to be more like a racetrack, when it comes to driving. Would your bill look at certain like Parkway, Turnpike, any roads, in particular where it seems to be a little bit more escalated, a little bit more racetrack than Parkway?
Well, I mean, the Parkway is one of the safest highways in the country. So, however people are driving on the Parkway is pretty reasonable. New Jersey's roadways, limit access highways especially, are very safe roadways. We have a good safety record here. Although, if you look at Germany, the autobahns, including the sections that have no speed limit, their fatality rate is lower than virtually all of the fatality rates in limit access highways in the United States, with our very well underposted or very significantly underposted speed limits. Again, a great argument for doing it my way rather than the way we are doing it. But look, as long as people are practicing proper lane discipline, you want people to be able to drive comfortably. Right now, I'll bet you the average speeds on our 85th percentile speeds on many of these roadways is 80, 85 miles an hour. I drove extensively throughout New Jersey yesterday, and I do it on a very regular basis. People are driving between 75 and 85 miles an hour. As long as you practice proper lane discipline, that's perfectly safe and reasonable. So we want people to be able to do that, so that they are not slamming on the brakes at the sight of a police officer. It shouldn't happen. We spoke a little bit off camera earlier about we all get out of the state to other states where you have 70, 75 mile an hour speed limits posted. It's much more relaxing, actually, because you're just not worried. Now, the way our roadways are, you could be, almost any one of us could be pulled over at any time because we're pretty much all well over the posted speed limit. That isn't the way that we should be doing it. It reduces respect for not only speed limit laws, but other laws as well. People should be able to look at our laws and look at our speed limits and realize they reflect reasonably behaving people driving reasonably. That's what we should strive for.
I mean, and that's how I was taught to drive by my dad is keep up. You want to keep up with the flow of traffic. If you start getting too close, let off the gas or you accelerate. And then, back in the 70s, 80s, that's when all the speed limits came upon us. And then depending on what state, then they pull it back. And the argument always tends to go back to safety. We're doing this for your safety. We're lowering the speed limit for your safety, and increasing the speed limit is going to lead to more accidents. So again, what type of feedback are you hearing in the legislature, or are your colleagues, pointing out that, or are they bringing up the point that this could lead to more accidents?
Well, if they point that out, I correct them because that's absolutely false. This will not appreciably change speeds. We know that for a fact. We also know that we heard the same arguments, again, back in the 90s when we ditched the 55 mile an hour speed limit for the 65. Didn't happen. Speeds didn't change appreciably, and we had the safest, smoothest traffic flow in the history of the state and decades of safety gains. So those same arguments fall flat here. We've also seen it in other states. So No, those arguments don't work. And I'm hearing really encouraging things from people about this. It's gotten a lot of play recently. I am hopeful I'll get some legislative co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle. We can get introduced in the assembly. It's a very sound and reasonable thing to do, and the time is to do it right now. It's a smart move.
Yeah. Well, how likely do you think that this is to not just gain traction, but to pass? So Democrats have control. We're leading into a gubernatorial election. Affordability, a lot of other issues seem to come to the top of people's list, not necessarily how fast are you going, although that is a quality of life issue that affects drivers every single day in our commute.
It does. And look, and it's an affordability thing too, because right now, again, with speeds being between 75 and 80 miles an hour, the sections of these roadways that are ridiculously right now posted at 55, you're going to get a 4-point ticket just for going along the flow of traffic, and you're going to get a hefty fine. So it is affordability as well. That's a tax essentially, because it's not about safety generally, and it hurts the poor the most. It's a regressive tax, so it is about affordability as well. Look, this is a wise thing to do, which maybe reduces the likelihood it will happen in New Jersey, because we don't tend to do wise things here frequently enough. But I'm hopeful we can overcome that inertia against good policy and get this done.
We don't do wise things in New Jersey. I'm gonna leave it at your words, not mine, but I'm gonna leave it.
Too rare an occurrence.
Senator, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it, and I know that what you're saying is not an admission of you breaking the law and going that far over the speed limit. But we thank you for your time.
No, I will cop to that. I drive very reasonably with the flow of traffic. Yesterday, it was around 80 miles an hour. I'm not going to shy away from admitting that I'm behaving reasonably. And if someone wants to come and ticket me, they can. I'll voluntarily take that ticket. But I'm doing what everybody else is doing. The speed limit should reflect that.
Yeah, like the saying goes, I can't drive 55. Senator, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. Thanks so much for watching New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.